My first guest this evening is one of my all-time favourite guests. To call him a renowned hip-hop artist, as I'm being asked to do so now, is like saying George Best was a footballer. Lowkey is a veritable professor on stage, in his music, and in his political analysis. He's the host of the Watchdog podcast, and he is indeed a political campaigner supreme. It's my honour always to have him on the show. Lowkey, you heard, I hope, my opening remarks. So I wanted to ask you, have you seen any signs amongst the mayhem that the MI5 chief considers our streets to be, of any Russians, any people with snow on their boots, any fur hats, any vodka bottles lying around, anyone talking in a pronounced Russian accent? Do you really think the Russians are behind Britain's problems?
Thank you so much for the very generous introduction, George. I'm certainly not worthy of that, but it's always lovely to see you. Now, this is the classic case of diversion and threat inflation, and the intelligence services are adept at doing this kind of operation. We've seen it throughout their activity domestically, and of course, in the north of Ireland, they were renowned for this type of propaganda campaign to divert people's attention in the wrong direction. Of course, what we do know is that the general standards of people's lives become worse when they are less protected by collective bargaining. We know that when a larger proportion of the population in this country had employment agreements which were won off the back of collective bargaining, that the disparity between the richest and the poorest was far smaller. And it's also been shown that when the disparity between the richest and the poorest is smaller in any society, there are generally higher levels of happiness and lower levels of crime. That is a fact which repeatedly we see play out across the world. But what has happened is across the neoliberal era, you have seen the disparity between the richest and the poorest grow to pre-World War I levels. So what that means is you have currently about 1% of the population, the richest 1%, taking at least 20% of the national income. Prior to Thatcher coming in, you had the top 1% of the population taking about 6% of the national income, 4% after tax. Whereas what you've had in an attritional way has been the eating away of people's rights. And part of that has, of course, been the anti-union legislation. It has been the hollowing out of the state. It has been the selling off of the key state assets, but also it's been the activities of MI5 themselves. Through the Special Demonstration Squad, which was founded in 1968, you had the infiltration of all manner of organizations, not just all of the main trade unions, but even around 1,000 political organizations, including Eat Out Vegan Wales, Houseman's Bookshop, the National Teachers Union, the National Union of Students, the Rebel Clown Army, Veggies Catering Nottingham, and even a hedgehog rescue organization were infiltrated by spy cops who were answering directly to MI5. And in addition to that, you had even School Kids Against Nazis, a grouping of children in schools having information gathered about them and passed on directly to MI5. So actually, the slippery slope that this country has fallen down, which has led to the situation we are in today, is something that has directly involved MI5 in dispossessing people of their rights to collectively bargain and win a better deal when it comes to clashes with their employer.
Well, you've educated us there. I was unaware that veggies and hedgehog protection was such a dangerous pastime, and that Mr. Bean Counter had his agents there. Which leads me to the perennial question. I've asked you this before. I've been asking it of myself for many decades. Are we ruled by fools or knaves? And which would be worse?
I would lean more towards knaves. But on this issue also of MI5 and sovereignty, again, I have made the point before, and I think that it's so important that it does need to be made quite often. They are constantly badgering on about this idea of Russian interference. And in fact, even me myself, I was identified seemingly as having my Twitter account boosted by Russia and China in the Daily Telegraph. We can't forget that actually the first Director General of MI5 was a journalist with the Daily Telegraph. But of course, the ridiculous notion being put forth by this Daily Telegraph article was that somehow the public in this country were being manipulated by both China and Russia through the boosting of my Twitter account. Now, actually, what they found when they used the support of an Israeli tech company called Cyabra, which actually is so close to the Israeli military that it had half of its workforce go to fight in Gaza because they were reserves in the Israeli military. Bring them this information that supposedly something like 11% of the Twitter accounts that quote unquote interacted with my tweets were deemed to be fake Twitter accounts. So that was used. There was no causal connection between that and Russia and China presented in the article. But the idea was that that was unusual. When actually, if you look at, say, the account of Elon Musk, it's been estimated that about 50% of his followers on Twitter are actually fake accounts. So really, the supposed 11% of the accounts that interacted with mine are actually below. But I guess the overall point I'm trying to make here is that the very data which is processed by the Ministry of Defense and the Home Office, which is this is essentially the internal intelligence agency of the country, its data is processed by a company and held by a company called Oracle. Now, Oracle offered the directorship of the company to Benjamin Netanyahu. That is an issue of sovereignty. Larry Ellison, the founder and the head of Oracle, is one of the richest men in the world, but he's also one of the largest donors to the Friends of the IDF in the history of the charity. Oracle makes no secret of its very close relationship with Israel and its national institutions. So the question would have to be asked, is the data that the Home Office is keeping safe when it's in the hands of a company like Oracle? They really have enough problems to worry about. This idea of the Russians being behind every corner is literally just a lie to manipulate public perception.
Now, we've got a House of Commons where doltards predominate on both front benches, quite a bit of the back benches too, if you ask me. But we now have a situation where the main opposition party, the Conservatives, who are, I suppose, the alternative government, or always were, but who did so poorly in the last election under little Rishi Sunak, are about to choose between two veritable political giants. Somebody called Robert Genrich, who I swear to you, if he was sitting right next to me now, I would not know who he was, and Kemi Badenoch, who unfortunately I definitely would. Which of these two gets your vote, Lowkey?
Well, I think an interesting point to remember about Robert Genrich is he was actually found to have had inappropriate meetings with the Israeli billionaire Aiden Offer at the very time that there were key contracts being gone back and forth over by the government. Now, his get-out clause for these meetings with Aiden Offer was that Aiden Offer was a quote-unquote family friend. Now, that's very interesting because Aiden Offer is one of the owners of Zodiac Maritime. Now, Zodiac Maritime is a UK registered company which has been found by the Sunday Times in 2011 to be used to ferry elite Israeli forces for operations inside Iran, assassinations. In fact, Zodiac Maritime were involved in the assassination of the Hamas figure al-Mabhouh in Dubai, in the assassination that took place there. They were even implicated in the assassination of Abu Jihad in Tunis, the former head of intelligence for Yasser Arafat. And so, really, Robert Genrich is directly linked here to Israeli intelligence in a major way. For Iden offered to be a family friend, but simultaneously run a company which has functioned as a front for Israeli intelligence. Again, this poses a massive threat to national security and national sovereignty, in my opinion. Robert Genrich has gone on record on Sky News and said that if people call out God is great in Arabic during a pro-Palestinian demonstration, they should be arrested on the spot. He has called for the Star of David to be displayed at all entry points to the UK out of loyalty to Israel. He's even called for all British citizens to sign an oath of loyalty to Israel. This is insane. And he is clearly, he's clearly so far to the right. You know, this is Margaret Thatcher was certainly to the left of him on Israel. Let's not forget that when Najil Ali, the Palestinian cartoonist responsible for the Handala picture of the refugee child facing backwards, Najil Ali was assassinated in this country on the streets of central London. Now, when that happened, Margaret Thatcher expelled the Mossad base. But what you now have, in the case of both Keir Starmer and Robert Genrich, is them essentially, in my opinion, establishing Mossad bases within their own parties. So really, my bet would be on Robert Genrich winning, and I don't think it would be very good for any of us.
Well, I might have known that you would know him because there's actually not that much that you don't know. I remind the audience that Lowkey had absolutely no idea what I was going to ask him tonight. And he might well have imagined it was going to be about matters of foreign affairs. Last question, Lowkey, but not unadjacent. The Labour Party is currently basically pretending that the massacres in Gaza and Lebanon are not happening, even though they are in power and they are involved in the war in the ways I described earlier. I have not heard or seen even any of the backbenchers say anything for weeks about the genocide that's going on. Is this going to be a successful maneuver? Just kind of whisper it softly, keep on keeping on with the bombing and the killing, but don't say too much about it?
Well, unfortunately, George, as you know better than any, the servility of the British media class is really limitless when it comes to these kind of issues. So unfortunately, without the work of yourself, of myself, of Declassified UK, of other key, but few in number, individuals, you would not have much of a light being shone on this. And it was so important that you mentioned Akrotiri in Cyprus, because even in the Israelis' conception of what is happening, they have described Akrotiri as the logistics hub of this war. It's only 45 minutes from Gaza. You've seen weapons flowing in there from the Germans, from the Americans, from the British, of course, and the British share all of the information that they are gathering there through surveillance of the resistance factions with the Israelis and with the Americans. This is a desperate situation. We've moved beyond the concept of British complicity in this now regional war. There is an issue of British direct participation. You know, you have to remember that when the genocide in Gaza began, a D-notice was issued by the British government to the journalists to not mention the idea of SAS operations in Gaza. Why would you need a D notice to tell people not to publish information about SAS activity in Gaza if there was no SAS activity in Gaza? Now, Israel has fantastical maximalist objectives with the region as a whole. It wants generational cultural change, and it is stopping at nothing to meet those objectives. I guess the question here is, what will be the true nature of Britain's role in assisting this horrendous campaign?
Well, I always say it, but I mean it more tonight than I have ever meant it. You, my dear son, are a genius. Lowkey, thank you for being on the mother of all talk shows.